Hi, this is Ashley Sharpton. I am the postdoc here at the Counseling Center, and I'm going to be talking about emotion regulation. So, what are emotions? So emotions are basically signals in your body that tell you what's happening. So most people say, emotions are good or bad, so like you're happy or you're sad. But they can be enjoyable, uncomfortable, or even painful. So positive things usually elicit emotions that feel pleasurable, and the negative things or events usually elicit emotions that feel uncomfortable. And so even though they may feel uncomfortable, they still serve an important purpose. And that purpose is to let you know, are things going well, or is there something happening that's not right that you need to make a change about? And then emotions can also make you feel other emotions. So there's primary emotions, which these are your initial or immediate reaction to what's happening. So for example, you have a presentation or a test coming up and you're feeling anxious about that. That would be the primary emotion. And then secondary emotions are your reactions to primary emotions. So that would be, if you feel worthless because you feel anxious in the first place about something like a test or a presentation. So, how do feelings work? So I think it's important to understand that emotions themselves aren't good or bad. It's mostly what you do with them or how you act on them. So you want to handle your emotions in a way that's healthy, non-destructive, and doesn't cause unnecessary pain or suffering for both yourself and anyone else. So it's really important to face your emotions rather than avoiding or ignoring them. They don't go away on their own. And then remember that all emotions are valid and legitimate, but if you impulsively act on some of the more painful emotions, so like anger, fear, sadness, shame, or guilt, those actions can be harmful or counterproductive. So, just kind of some simple steps of how to generally handle your emotions in healthy ways. I think first it's important to acknowledge your emotions so you can name them. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling happy. And then try and experience them or feel them in a way that maybe reduces their intensity, or it might encourage a new or different emotion. So this can be, you can do something different, sort of like distracting yourself, talking with your friends, watching a show or a video you really like, listening to music that you like. You can also purposefully change your actions or behaviors. So like if you're really angry and your impulse is to yell, try talking to someone calmly. I always recommend journaling or talking about your feelings and emotions with someone you trust. That's how we process emotions and work through them. And then you can also do like some self-care activities, so things that make you feel good, that are healthy. And then if possible, sort of depending on what the emotion is and what's causing you to feel that specific emotion, sometimes the best course of action is to actually just address the situation that caused the emotions. So like if you feel someone mistreated you, maybe bring that up with them, in a productive, healthy way. You can't always take that approach, but if you can, it's usually the most efficient and effective way of handling emotions that you maybe don't want to be feeling. So people often spend their lives paying little attention to how they feel. And so then this can lead to being unaware of important things that are happening internally. And sometimes people are able to recognize their emotion, but sometimes it's only when it's too intense or it's too late to do anything about it. So trying to slow down your emotions, so taking the time to sort of figure out, why am I feeling this way? What's making me happy, what's making me sad. That allows you to identify and then examine your emotions. And then once you do know what it is you're feeling and why, you can then take steps to manage them. So some simple kind of step-by-step to recognizing your emotions or knowing how you feel. Sort of ask yourself, what happened prior to me feeling this way? Why did it happen, or why do I think it might have happened? How do I feel physically? So in your body, like if you're anxious, a lot of times people get jittery or shaky. If you're angry, sometimes like your body temperature rises. And also, how do you feel emotionally? So what labels and words would you use to describe how you're feeling? What did you do? Did you take any actions in the moment? Did you just kind of sit with your feelings? And how did your emotions and actions affect you later? So you can go through these steps, kind of trying to think about a situation that happened recently. So something where maybe things didn't go right. It didn't turn out how you expected. You may have felt overwhelmed. Maybe you reacted in a way that later on you regretted and wish you had done differently. And then just kind of go through each of these steps or each of these questions and go through and identify or label what the emotions were you felt in that moment. What were the physical sensations related to that? Just becoming more aware of how emotions can influence you even when you're not feeling that way or you're no longer in the situation that caused them. If you ever think about having one negative event in the morning and it just sort of ruins your whole day, going through these steps after the fact can help you build up those skills. So then in the moment, you can maybe react differently. You can do things to make yourself feel different. And then your whole day isn't going to be ruined and it'll go a lot better for you. So this is a feeling wheel or emotion wheel. And it's just kind of a reference. And you can find these online. They're pretty easy to find with just a quick search. And so the purpose of it is not everyone has the words or the vocabulary to describe how they're feeling, whether it's those kind of bigger, more broad words in the middle like mad, scared, joyful, or the more nuanced words as you go out on the wheel. So like, I know I'm feeling sad, but is it more that I'm feeling miserable or am I lonely? And if I'm mad, am I more in a rage or just frustrated maybe? And so it's okay to use a wheel like this if you don't have the words yet. Again, it's just something, it's a skill to build. It's just more important that you can acknowledge how you're feeling and put words to it. So these are some facial expressions that usually accompany certain emotions people feel. And so for some people, it's easier to start with words, so that the feeling wheel, but for other people, it may be easier to connect physically with your emotions. So maybe starting with, what does my face look like? Or what does this person's face look like? And then using that information to piece together what's the emotion behind that. And this one has a pretty good range of different feelings. And again, it's cartoon, but I think it's really helpful just to know. Generally, like if someone's mad, they're going to have their eyebrows lowered. And if someone's happy, they're going to be smiling. So even though we've been focusing mostly on emotions, it's important to know that your emotions don't exist in a vacuum, and usually they're connected to what thoughts you're having and possibly what behaviors you're having. So there's a theory called cognitive behavior theory, and so it's the idea that your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors or actions are all interconnected. So they all influence each other. And the point of the therapy is if you target one of those, one of the angles of the triangle, you can sometimes change the other two. So if you change the thoughts you're having, that can change how you act and feel. And then how you feel affects how you think and act. And then how you act and what you do is going to affect the thoughts you're having and what you're feeling. So, for example, if you think about yourself in a positive way, or you think good things about yourself, so I'm smart, I'm successful, I'm capable, or a situation, like I know what to do in the situation, I'll be fine, usually you feel better. And then conversely, if you think about things in a negative way, so like I'm worthless, I'm never going to be able to pass this test, it's too hard, usually then that makes you feel worse about yourself. And so you can see how if you can just change your thinking from the more negative aspects to more positive ones, which positive doesn't mean it's unrealistic, like it can be positive and accurate, and then generally you can feel better too. And so then also with the behaviors or actions, taking care of yourself physically and doing things that you enjoy can also prevent negative emotions. So feeling stressed, feeling anxious, feeling sad. And then you can also see how your emotions can influence how you act. So sort of that impulsive reactions we were talking about earlier. Or, if you're in a sad mood, sometimes it's hard to snap out of that and you just keep thinking negative thoughts. And sometimes it can be hard to know the difference between what's a thought and what's an emotion. So this is just some general guidelines. And sometimes some people are better at identifying their thoughts more than their emotions. So it's okay to start with your thoughts and what you're thinking. But you can also check for physical changes in your body to help figure out what you're feeling. So there's a nice chart here. And so just some general guidelines. So emotions are usually one word. So thinking back to that feeling wheel and the facial expressions, those are all one words. And usually thoughts are like a sentence or a string of words, like a phrase, something like that. Emotions cause feelings all over your body, while thoughts are typically experienced as only being in your head or your mind. And thoughts can be fact-checked. So you can argue with thoughts, you can poke holes in a thought and show how it's not really accurate or realistic, but you can't argue with emotions. So if someone can refute what you're saying, then it's probably a thought. People may try to refute what you're feeling, but feelings are subjective and everyone's entitled to feel how they feel. So just some examples of the differences between emotions and thoughts and how they're connected and also how they're different. So if you look at the emotion, let's see, anger or irritation or annoyance, so those are emotions. The thoughts you might have if you're feeling those ways is you may believe that someone's treating you unfairly or trying to take advantage of you. You might make assumptions about someone's intention, like, oh, they're out to get me, or, they did this on purpose. They shouldn't do that. Nobody has any manners. So here are some things you can do to practice healthy behavior. So again, that one of the legs of that CBT triangle. So a good self-care routine can help you manage uncomfortable emotions when they arise, more so than if you weren't taking care of yourself. I like to give an example of like a car that needs gas to run. So if your car doesn't have gas, it doesn't work. And the same thing with our bodies and our brains. If we're not getting the proper nutrition, if we're not getting physical movement in, good sleep, trying not to use substances that can damage our bodies, and then making sure we address any stress or tension we might feeling. It's kind of like you're running out of gas. So it's really important to just take care of yourself physically. So then you're in the best position to manage or prevent any situations where you may feel overwhelmed by your emotions. And here are some things you can do to practice healthy thoughts, which is the thought leg of that CBT triangle. So mental health is just as important as physical health. And so there are two different strategies or skills on here. So defusion, and this is a skill that helps you distance yourself from your thoughts when they're causing painful emotions. So if you remember that thoughts aren't facts, they can come and go over the course of a day. Like sometimes you think about one thing, but then a couple hours later you've completely forgotten about it. So they pop in your head and then they can leave just as quickly unless you pay attention to them, you focus on them, you fixate or ruminate on them. So if a certain thought occurs and it just kind of sticks around in your head and it's hard not to think about it, defusion can be really helpful. Really helpful with that. So it uses a lot of imagery. So you can imagine the thought. So label the thought. Say, I'm having this thought. It's unhelpful. It's making me feel sad. It's making me feel angry. And then imagine that thought is something that's outside of your body, outside of your head that you can look at. So I like to use clouds a lot. So imagine, think about like a day, a nice sunny day, and there are all the big fluffy clouds. And you look up at the sky one time, and you see a certain cloud. But then if you come back a couple of hours later, usually that cloud isn't there anymore, or it's moved across the sky. So imagine your thought being the same as that cloud. It's there, and then it can disappear. And you can actually watch it as it floats away too. So other things you can kind of visualize, or maybe the thought is words that have been written in the sand, and then the tide comes in and it just washes it all away. Sometimes you can think of the thought as like an annoying pop-up ad, and so you can imagine yourself just Xing out of it, or clicking out of it, closing it. You can imagine the thought being a leaf that falls off of a tree, and it either gets blown away by the wind, or it falls in a stream and is washed away. And so the whole idea is to take the power away from your thoughts so they don't have to affect how you feel. Especially if they're what we call like maladaptive or inaccurate, unrealistic thoughts. And then doing things to remember, just because I have a thought, it doesn't mean it's true. So disconnect from it, take the power away from it, and it can help you feel differently. And then the second strategy you can use is coping thoughts. So coping thoughts are statements that you can tell yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed, and they can help soothe you. They can help you feel differently. And so everyone is going to have different coping thoughts, and it's just really important to focus on things that you like about yourself that help you remember that you're human and not perfect. I think it's really easy to get caught up in trying to be perfect, which again isn't realistic, and doesn't help you feel good. And then also the coping thoughts that remind you of positive things that you've done. So here are just a couple of examples of different coping thoughts. So you can use these exact ones, you can change them, you can come up with your own. But it's like generally just things that'll make you feel better when maybe you're having more negative, unhelpful thoughts that make you feel bad about yourself or a situation. So remembering mistakes happen, nobody's perfect. I can be anxious or sad or angry, and I can still deal with this situation. This is an opportunity for me to learn how to cope with my feelings. this situation sucks, but it's only temporary. So just remembering, like things might not be really great in that moment, but that moment isn't going to last forever. And remembering that you probably have dealt with things like this before, and that, things were fine afterward. So another kind of strategy is seeing the big picture. When you only pay attention to part of what's happening in a situation, you can be overwhelmed with your emotions. And so that's called filtering. You filter out other aspects of what's going on. So usually it's the positive things that could help you feel differently. So you tend to filter out positive and only notice the negative parts. So an example is a student who has, like, let's say a 3.8 GPA, they make a B on a test and they have a breakdown. They think, I'm such a loser, I'll never get into grad school now. And so this student has filtered out all of the other times where they did well on tests, like they didn't get a 3.8 GPA by not doing anything good, and they're only paying attention to that one B. So you can balance your thoughts by finding evidence for how you're feeling or thinking, and also evidence for the other side of how you're feeling. So in the example that I just gave, that student could look for reasons to prove that they're a loser, but also look for reasons that show that they're successful, that they've got a good chance of getting into grad school. So balancing your thoughts and feelings by seeing the big picture, which is gaining perspective, can help you feel less overwhelmed by your emotions. It can also help instill more positive emotions. And then you can find healthy ways to cope, and maybe healthy ways of feeling better or dealing with the situation. So I think it's important that you're able to acknowledge and identify your emotions, but doing so without judging them or judging yourself for having those emotions in the first place. And so if you're able to identify and experience your emotions non-judgmentally, that can decrease the likelihood that your emotions are going to be those intense, overwhelming, or painful ones. So guided imagery is an exercise that I'm going to walk through, and it just kind of helps you learn how to practice non-judgmental observation. So instead of getting upset that you're feeling anxious about something, this is a way of saying, I'm anxious and it's okay to be anxious in this situation. If you're feeling sad because someone broke up with you and it's like, they weren't that great of a person, why am I feeling so sad? That's an example of judging your feelings, instead of just being like, even though the relationship sucked and they didn't treat me the greatest, there were still good parts of it, and it's perfectly fine for me to feel sad that those good parts are going to be gone now. And so sometimes it's helpful to have an exercise where you can practice that. And then when a situation occurs, then you can kind of have an idea of what to do to practice non-judgmental observation. So if you want to take a minute and just kind of get in a comfortable position, and then just kind of start slowing things down. So while breathing slowly, focus on the parts of your body where you feel a given emotion. So that can be the anger, it can be guilt, it can be sadness, it can be regret. Just notice any physical sensations that are happening and become aware of the strength of the feeling. So how strong is my sadness? How strong is the anger? Is it pleasant? Is it painful? If you can, try and name what it is that you're feeling. And then try to notice your thoughts. Are any of your thoughts judging the emotion or judging yourself? Are you calling yourself names? Are you wishing that you could feel something different? While observing these emotions and thoughts, imagine that each judgment is, so kind of going back to that imagery we used before, is it a leaf, a cloud, words written in the sand? And then imagine those things disappearing or passing. Because emotions are transient. No one feels the same thing all the time. Even if you feel predominantly one way most of the time, usually there's something else in there. Situations change. So learning not to judge your emotions can help you better get through those situations where you may not feel the best. So then once you've identified your feeling, you've kind of got it in one of those visualizations, the last step is letting go of it. And so letting go of it doesn't mean, that what happened to cause the emotion is okay. It doesn't mean you don't need to do anything. It just means I'm not going to hang on to it, and I'm not going to let it make me feel worse. And so this is just something you can do, again, if you are feeling those emotions that aren't as comfortable or aren't as pleasant to feel. And again, the feeling will pass, and then you can go on and deal with the situation that you need to. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. And again, there's a lot of information out there on emotion regulation if you feel this is something you could benefit from. And then, of course, here at the Counseling Center, we're available for students if they need any additional support. So you can always call or come by for an appointment. Thanks for listening.